Well, hey there, everybody. It's your boy, Mr. Perry, and here we are, Unit 6, Lesson 3. This time we're talking about enhanced for loops. So let's get into it. You know, I also teach AP Computer Science Principles, where I teach Python. And one thing I really liked about the Python programming language is just how easy it was to kind of follow the syntax and understand what it was doing. So here's a little code snippet over here. The code block to the right illustrates how to print each number in a list called enums using Python syntax. And I just find that the syntax in Python is just very simple and elegant compared to Java. With Java, there's so much more punctuation marks that we have to add in here, and so many more, so many more rules of syntax that can just make things go wrong. And so the question is there an easier way to loop through an array in Java, similarly to how you do it here in Python? And it turns out the answer is yes. So we're just going to do a quick review of Lesson 2. In Lesson 2, we learned how to use a traditional for loop to loop through an array of any kind and to print or to do whatever it was we needed to do with that array. And so we had to learn all of this syntax. We had to talk about the difference between, length with parentheses versus length without parentheses, and having to do, the square brackets to access the index of the I value and all this kind of stuff. Again, there's a lot of syntax here. Well, here we go. Let's go ahead and look at what we're learning in Lesson 3, the enhanced for loop. Here is the basic syntax for an enhanced for loop. We start with an array of integers called enums, and this is what it looks like. It says for, and then in parentheses, int num, and then we have a colon, and then nums. Close your parentheses. We've got your curly braces, and then system.out.println num. So this reminds me a lot more of how I learned how to do this in Python. It's a simplified syntax, and again, just seems to kind of make things a little bit easier, even though, Java is not necessarily easy, but, this is a slightly easier way of writing a for loop. So this is called an enhanced for loop. Now let's go ahead and look at how we would do this if we had an array of doubles. So here is an array of doubles called prices, and here are the elements. And so now I've got for, open parentheses, double price, colon, prices, and then our print statement, and then price is what goes on the inside here. How about if we had an array of strings? So here's an array of strings called letters, and we've got just the first 4 letters of the alphabet stored in there. And now it says for string letter, colon, letters, and then again, in the print statement, it just says letter. So let's go ahead and break down the syntax here and take note of what must match. Anytime you're going to try to write an enhanced for loop to traverse an array, there are certain things that need to be in the correct order. And so the first thing you want to do is take note of your data type. So if the data type of the array is an integer, so integer array, so then what you put inside your parentheses is that same data type, int. So again, these two things need to match. The next two things that need to match is the name of your array, and in this case it's nums. This needs to be repeated over here on the right side of the colon. So whatever the name of your array is here, it needs to be repeated over here. And then finally, whatever you call this variable right here, and in this case num, that's what you're putting in your parentheses in here. Whenever you refer to whatever you're referring to within the bounds of your curly braces, you're going to make sure that this variable matches the variable that you see right here. So it's very important to take note of the syntax of an enhanced for loop and to remember what must match. The data type of the array needs to be repeated right here. The name of your array gets repeated over here. And then whatever variable name you come up with here needs to be repeated in here. That's what you're working with within your curly braces. All right, well, let's try it out. Here you are looking at an array of integers. And here is a traditional for loop that I'm using to traverse and the array and print every single integer that's in there. Go ahead and pause the video, grab a sheet of paper, and see if you can convert this traditional for loop into an enhanced for loop. I'm assuming you paused the video and you tried it out. Let's go ahead and check out the answer. So here we go. This is an array of integers. So we would say for and then open our parentheses, and int is what we would put. Integers is the name of the array. So I've got that written over here. And I just went ahead and called it num. I could have called it integer. I could have said for int integer in integers, but that's too many integers for me. So I just called it num. Again, you have control. You can call this whatever you want to. Just make sure that that's what you're repeating inside here. Let's try another one. This time I'm going to give you an enhanced for loop. See if you can convert this back into a regular for loop. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can write it out. I assume you paused the video at this point, so let's go ahead and check out our enhanced for loop. For double decimal, colon decimals, and we are printing the decimal. So to make that a regular for loop, we would just say for int I equals 0, as long as I is less than decimals.length, I plus plus. And then again, in the print statement, now we have to do decimals at I. So just notice how the syntax changes from when you're using an enhanced for loop versus a traditional for loop. Let's try one more. I'm going to throw a curveball at you here. Now I've got an array of album objects. So album array, and I'm calling it albums, and I'm setting it equal to, and we're just going to assume that these are album objects that have already been instantiated. So I've got album 1, album 2, and album 3. So now here is a traditional for loop that is traversing the array. And what it's doing is it's calling for every single index value of I, it's calling the getTitle method. So see if you can pause the video and rewrite this as an enhanced for loop that will still call the getTitle method on each of these album objects. I'll ask you to pause the video now and try that out. I'm assuming you paused the video and wrote it out, so let's see what the answer is. So again, this is an array of album objects. So the data type this time is, objects of the album class. So I just need to make sure that I'm repeating that down here. The name of my array is albums, so that goes over here. And again, I just need to come up with a name for each one of these elements. So I'm just going to call it album. And then in my print statement, I would call album.getTitle. And what this is going to do is this is going to go to album 1, and it's going to call the album 1 getTitle method, and so on and so forth. It's going to do that for every single one of them. All right, so a couple of common mistakes. Again, Java is all about memorizing the syntax and making sure that you're, being careful to remember all the details. So the number one mistake that a lot of students make when writing an enhanced for loop is they forget to write the data type right here. So instead of for num in integers, it should say for int num in integers. It's important to have the data type here because what you're doing is you're actually declaring a new variable that will be used to traverse the array and make copies of these values for us to look at. Another common mistake is to have a wrong reference in the parentheses. So here we got for int num in integers, and we are printing the word integer, which again, it needs to match this right here. We need to make sure that we're printing num. I've also seen students do this where they've written the header for an enhanced for loop, and then they're printing integers at I, which this is what you do for a traditional for loop. So it's they're kind of confusing the syntax for a traditional for loop with that of an enhanced for loop. So those are just a couple of things that I've seen students do in the past. All right, so why are we even learning enhanced for loops? Technically, enhanced for loops are shorter and easier to write. You can think of them as just like a quick and easy way to traverse an array from start to finish. So there is a benefit in that. Now, the drawback of an enhanced for loop is that it's new syntax to memorize and also a new control structure to memorize. So, again, there's just a lot of stuff to remember here. And so that's one of the drawbacks, but there actually are a few other drawbacks. The enhanced for loops do have some limitations, which are important to note. So limitation number one, they give you less control over how you're traversing the array. Enhanced for loops only work for looping an entire array from beginning to end. That's why it's sometimes called a for each loop, because it's literally going to go through the entire array. And for each element in the array, it's going to do whatever you're telling it to do. Regular for loops allow you to traverse the array in reverse order or to skip every other element. You know, we've learned with a traditional for loop that you can change that for loop header, and it gives you far greater control over how you're traversing the array. An enhanced for loop only works for traversing an array from beginning to end. That's it. Enhanced for loops do not give you access to the index. So if your program requires you to access the index value, then you have to use a regular for loop. Let's look at an example of that. Here, I've got an array of integers, and now I'm looping through almost the entire array. It says for int I is at 0, as long as I is less than nums.length minus 1. And what this is doing is this is changing the value of each element to be the value of that element plus the value of the next element. And then it's printing each one of them. So what this is going to do is when the index is 0, nums at 0 is going to be changed to nums at 0 plus nums at 1. So our 1 would actually become 1 plus 3, so it would become 4. And then this would print the number 4. And then when the index goes up to 1, it's going to reassign the index at 1 to be 3 plus 5. So the 3 would change to 8, and then it would print the 8. And this would happen all the way up to here. It would reassign this to be 10 plus 11. And of course, you can't do it with this one because this is the final element. I wouldn't be able to add the next one. So that's why this algorithm has to stop right here and not include the length minus 1. But anyways, there's no way I could do this with an enhanced for loop because an enhanced for loop doesn't give you access to the index like you see right here. So that's an important limitation to take note of. Enhanced for loops, with them, you can't traverse only part of the array. So with a traditional for loop, I could print only the first half of the array by doing a for loop that says as long as I is less than nums.length, as long as I is less than nums.length divided by 2. This for loop right here is only going to print 1, 3, and 5, and then it would leave out the second half of the array. Again, I wouldn't be able to do this with an enhanced for loop. Enhanced for loops always traverse the entire array. And then the final limitation is that you can't change the values of the array with an enhanced for loop. So we saw in lesson 2, I could take an array of integers called nums, and I could loop through, or I could traverse that array, and I could reassign each value to be the value times itself. So I could basically go through and reassign each of these to be the square of the number. So this is something I can do with an enhanced for loop. I'm sorry, this is something I can do with a regular for loop, but I wouldn't be able to do that with an enhanced for loop. And let me show you why. Go ahead and pause the video again, read through this algorithm, and try to predict what you think is going to print. All right, I'll give you a second to do that. So I assume you paused the video, and I assume you read through this. Let's go ahead and see what's going to happen. So on the first enhanced for loop, it says for int num in nums, num equals num times 2. Go ahead and print the num. So it takes our element number 1 and it changes it to be 1 times 2 and then prints the 2. So we would see 2, and then similarly, it would go through and it would multiply the rest of these inside this an enhanced for loop. And it would print 2, 6, 10, 14, 20, and 22. But then down here, when I loop through my array of nums again, with just printing the values, you'll see that they've remained unchanged. So basically what's happening is in an enhanced for loop, when you say for int num, you are declaring a brand new variable, which is going to be a local variable for this enhanced for loop. And so when you say num equals num times 2, this basically makes a copy of this value right here, multiplies it by 2, and then it's printing the copy of that original value. But the original value remains unchanged. When you loop back through down here, the value of the of num has not changed. And so again, that's another important limitation to enhanced for loops. So the original value of the nums in the array remains unchanged. So that's important to note as well. We'll wrap this up with just a couple of common uses of enhanced for loops. So you could use an enhanced for loop to add up the numbers in an array. So let's say you had a method called sum, and it took in an array of integers. What you could do is you could declare a variable called sum, set it equal to 0, and then use an enhanced for loop to go ahead and add every number in this array to your sum, and then you would be able to return the sum. So this is one way, a common way that enhanced for loops could get used. Another way that you could use an enhanced for loop is to return the average. In order to calculate the average, you have to traverse the entire array, and you have to add up the sum. And so we're basically doing the same thing here. We've got an array of doubles that is being passed in called ARR. And so first thing we're going to do is calculate the sum. We'll say double sum equals 0. And then for every double num in our array, sum equals sum plus num. So this is going to add all of them up. And then what we could do is we could return the sum divided by array.length. And because sum was a double originally, then, again, this is going to be a double divided by an integer, which would return the double correctly. So this is another way that we could use it. And we'll look at one more here. You could also find the maximum value in an array. So here is a method called getMax, taking in an array of integers called ARR. And so the way this works is it says int max equals the array at position 0. So what we're doing is we're assuming that the very first element is the maximum value. But then what we're doing is for every number in this array, we're checking if the number is greater than the max. And so if it does loop through the rest of that array, and if it does find a value that's larger than the max, then it reassigns the variable max to be the value of that number. And then finally, it would return the max. And we're gonna practice more algorithms like this next week. So there you go. With that, you are through with your notes. So you're free to start working through lesson 3 of Unit 6. And I will also be posting some enhanced for loop activities as alternate practice. And this slideshow is shared with you. So once again, if you want to watch the AP Daily video that explains enhanced for loops, you can do that. And like before, you can use enhanced for loops to try out some of the practice it activities, or even the coding bat activities. You can try out enhanced for loops with some of those. All right, guys, that's it. I'll see you in class.